Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I hope you are well, living the dream, as it were. This episode is called You Can't Live in a Bitcoin. And it's, of course, about the fact that you can't live in a Bitcoin, but more specifically about the fact that there are trade-offs that we have to make when it comes to life and investing. And so that we got into a little bit about real estate and some of the trade-offs involved in either selling your Bitcoin and buying a home or leveraging up against it. Or what are some of the solutions and how should we be thinking about this? Otherwise, I do have some tremendous news and an announcement that I'm so excited to share with you. I've been working away in the background on a business that I've just launched in conjunction with a group of fine Bitcoiners. And we are officially live if you haven't seen it already. It's been a long journey to finding the right kind of opportunity or business in this Bitcoin world, but this particular one has me buzzing. And I truly can't wait to see how everything unfolds in this new and evolving space. Going forward, it will be the first and, dare I say, lead sponsor of the show. And so I did spend a bit of time in this pod getting some of the details about this announcement, what it's all about. But if you have any questions, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you. As always, I appreciate the hell out of you guys, and I do not take your support for granted. That's more than enough from me. Let's jump straight into the show. Welcome back to the Why Bitcoin Show and a repeat guest. Good to have you on
Thank
from
you.
beautiful Byron.
hmm
How are you enjoying Byron, by the way?
I short answer, loving it.
Mm.
And my elevator response to people in playgrounds, which I spend a lot of time doing these days, is that I used to come on holiday to places like this and be like, wicked place to visit, but who the fuck would live there? Because it's just so tiny. There's just nothing here.
Yeah.
But now that I have a couple of small kids and one on the way, I spend a lot of time with a pram and nappies and not an awful lot else. And suddenly, the appeal of being in a small town with a beautiful beach and really great weather, a couple of nice restaurants, few good shops, and lots of great food and booze. You're like, this is fucking awesome, to be honest. So,
Mm.
being a digital entrepreneur and investor, I can sit wherever I want, and this is ticking a lot of boxes right now. Yeah, we've rented a place for the next year and we'll see where it takes us. But at the moment, it's all very, very positive, having spent the best part of 20 years kind of chasing the fast life in multiple different places, different cities. It's a big change of energy and a shift of gears. And I'm really enjoying having a slower pace of life. And I can feel my body reacting underneath me, becoming calmer, more relaxed. And equally, I knew for a long time that once we got settled here, I had a big kind of creative wave that was about to be unleashed, and that's what we'll talk about today.
Whew.
It's
Awesome, man.
it's it's going to be a great spot to to be a parent, spend time with your kids, and create some cool stuff.
That's so good to hear, man. Because, yeah, I live just 30 Ks north from where you are, and the energy's different. The people are different, sort of very family orientated, hippie folks. And honestly, I was in the best shape that I've been in for many years. And part of it, I think, was because I was grounded so often. I was walking barefoot on the beach,
Yeah.
my dog, every single day. And it's a special place and the weather's epic and it just ticks so many boxes. If you are able to earn an income and work remotely, awesome. It's not the best if you need to be near a major metro,
Mm,
but what a cool place, man. I absolutely love that part of the world, and it'll
mm.
always have like a special part in my heart, the Northern Rivers, man. So I'm so pleased to hear that and that you're kind of flourishing because
Thank
I
you.
never could understand the Melbourne allure, aside from the nice restaurants and whatnot, but the weather would always upset me, not to mention the politics.
Oh, Dan, he's gone. I
Oh,
spent a bit of
Danny.
time charging around the streets of central Melbourne shouting "Sack Dan Andrews."
Oh,
So I have
geez.
Melbourne has a very close place in my heart in that sense. Wasn't fun, but all my
Ah,
wife's family are from Melbourne, so for me that's my kind of second home, having moved over from the UK. So I'm
yes.
a big fan of Melbourne. But yes, as you said, it's very, very nice up here. So I'm pleased to be spending some time this part of the world.
Awesome, man. Well, I think we've got a lot to cover today. I've got intentions for us to cover a fair bit. But I thought we should start with some big news. Got a big announcement that I want to share with everyone. And I thought perhaps I could start by giving kind of a little bit of the story of my journey, because obviously you were instrumental in it in the sense that you dared me to start a podcast. But
Mm.
before that, I was trying to work in Bitcoin. So in 2020, I was orange pilled and I was absolutely obsessed about trying to find a way to work in the space. I was living in Casarina, Northern Rivers, kind of roughly where you are.
Mm.
And I was desperately trying to find a way to earn an income in this space, and I needed to earn an income. So I set up a company called Bitcoin Shepherd with the goal of trying to help onboard people to Bitcoin. And I would help, set up a wallet and just help get people's coins of exchanges, just the basics, man, the absolute basics. Perhaps I put in 200 hours by that stage. For a couple different reasons, I think it didn't work. One, I didn't put in the proof of work. I was really green in the space. So I didn't have a name or any credibility behind me. And the second thing is I also think it was a touch early for that kind of offering, because I don't think it had quite crossed into the sort of mainstream consciousness at that point, right? So I then was like, okay, I need to pivot. How else do I work in Bitcoin? Well, I moved into the world of crypto publications. I started trying to write about Bitcoin, and pretty much early on realized, look, it's not a great industry. It's cutthroat. It's high. It's fast paced, and the pay is absolute dog vomit. It's terrible. So there's no upside. Plus, I was working in crypto. I tried my best to write about Bitcoin. Often had to write about crypto stuff, and it was super challenging. Eventually, escaped that. Got back to kind of my quote unquote roots, where I've spent most of my career in the fiat world in commercial property. And at that point, decided to launch a podcast based off of the man in front of me who used to have long hair and now is sort of
Who used to rock a man bun.
he used to rock a man bun confidently, I might add. And so, I launched a Bitcoin pod, and that was epic. And I've loved the journey. It's a
Well
creative
done.
outlet.
It's
The
been awesome to watch.
conversations are so invigorating. They make me feel connected to people and humanity because we're different. Bitcoiners are just built different. And as fun as that journey has been, I've kind of kept thinking to myself, well, I don't know how I turn this into a career. I don't know how I can actually earn a real living. I don't want to just survive, I want to thrive. And I don't see how I can do that. You've got the likes of McCormick, who came in super early. And then you've got Natalie Brunell, who's got a certain corner. And then you've got all the different sort of main podcasts. And I'd say they have a market share, the top five, of like 75, 80% of the market. And the rest of us are kind of competing, quote unquote, for scraps, even though we are all promoting something that we really strongly believe in. So I was like, well, that's not going to ultimately create financial freedom. That's not going to actually give me a living. That's not going to be a job. I want to get out of fiat. How do I do that? And so 6 months ago, I started really thinking deeply about where the areas in Bitcoin I can actually make a difference. And I was like, well, I'm bullish on a few different areas. The one is Bitcoin backed loans, which I'd love to chat to you about later. But I don't have the background in that. And I'm not like, I haven't got experience in fintech and or banking or anything like that. And I think it's a little premature potentially. And then collaborative custody and consultancy. And you can kind of lump those two together. And so over the last couple months, I'd say 2 or 3 months, we've been working together, you and I, on launching a new business here in Australia. I'm really excited to announce today.
Look at that smirk. Come on.
I
Here we
got a
go.
smirk, man.
Spit it out.
That myself, Jake, as well as Ben from BTC Sessions, Ben Perrin and Mike Cook, we're launching Bitcoin Mentor Australia, and it's live. By the time this comes out, it's live. And this has been a little bit of work in the making. Feel absolutely blessed to be working with such a great group of people. I guess what excites me about Bitcoin Mentor is that it really aligns with what I think is the Bitcoin ethos, which is, ultimately about self-sovereignty, financial freedom and self-sovereignty. And wherever you are on your Bitcoin journey, if you're experienced or you're inexperienced, our business can help you. We're not trying to push you in one direction or particular. It's really about understanding what your needs are. And, if those needs involve collaborative custody, we can help you too. But if ultimately you just want to figure out how to buy Bitcoin, get it off exchanges and put it into cold storage, we can do that too. So I find that really compelling, and it was an opportunity that I just absolutely was so grateful to come across. And I think it's only because of the podcast. And I think then also that was also an encouragement from you. So it's come full circle, man. It's like literally we are about 14 months into the pod, and here I am today, business owner of Bitcoin Mentor, together with yourself and two other fine gentlemen. And let's fucking go. I'm so
Well,
pumped,
cheers
man.
to that.
Cheers to
Cheers
that,
to
mate.
that.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. To
Woo!
Tuesday night G&T.
There we go. And I've got a little bit of a whiskey lime.
Well done.
So
Well
what are your
done.
thoughts initially there, mate? I
Well
mean,
done, mate. It's been awesome to watch your progress over the last 12 months. And I'm also like beyond excited to be starting this new company and be working with the team that has come together to launch it. And I don't know where it's going to go, but it's extremely exciting. And there's loads of comments I have to all of that. But the one that's really coming to the top of my mind is I remember when I first went to a bush bash, and it was in Beechworth, 2022, maybe. I think it was the second one they'd ever done in Victoria. And I had, spent a period of time in fiat startup land. I was an angel investor in some companies. I was looking in particular at that stage at clean tech as, the future of the energy market and things like that.
mm,
And I'd also tried to found companies before, digital software type plays that, highly scalable, big total addressable market, all this kind of shenanigans. And I don't need to go into that now. But when I first went to Beechworth, I was like, holy shit, look at all this talent. And that's one of the resounding thoughts I took away from me. And I was looking at it as an investor. I was like, right, I want to start an accelerator program. I want to see a flurry of Bitcoin startups come off the back of this. And I want to buy equity in those businesses and raise a fund. And it was cool. Did I do any of that? No. What did I learn that wasn't possible with so many things? But it's very poignant that we met at the Beechworth Bush Bash in April of last year, 2023. So it must have been 2021 that I first went, so 2 years later.
mm,
And here we are starting a business. And so anyone that's come across my content in the past, I'm very vocal about the fact that, to understand Bitcoin, you have to get to a physical event, because otherwise you're just a keyboard warrior and you're diving down the rabbit hole and you're researching everything you want. But at the end of the day, until you meet people physically that have actually adopted this thing in a meaningful way, it just doesn't hit home in quite the same sense. And so it's of no surprise to me whatsoever that a friendship that started when I saw you just make the most brilliant presentation about how outrageous it was working as a journalist in the crypto market and how you guys were basically lying for money. It's insane, right? It was such a good talk. I loved it. I was kind of giggling at the back. And then they were, the end of that evening, kind of gnawing my ear off about Bitcoin podcasts. It's like, right, challenge. You got 30 days, get your first episode out. And at the time, my Bitcoin with Jake project was kind of coming to a close. So I'd learned a ton over producing 80 of my own episodes. And so it was a kind of fun kind of mentoring process.
mm.
And and so yes, it's no surprise to me at all that I'm now in business with someone that I've met through an experience which was a physical Bitcoin meetup, like the Bitcoin Bush Bash. So wherever you are in the world listening to this, it's so important to get to those kind of events, because you make friends, and with friendships become ideas, and ideas become opportunities. And then here we are today launching Bitcoin Mentor Australia. And the other part being is then just podcasting as a tool. So you mentioned that the Bitcoin podcasting market, maybe there's 4 or 5 podcasts that have 80% of the audience, and
Yeah.
that's fine. Go for it. Those guys are therefore creating the most revenue in terms of sponsorship potential from a kind of out and out media play, i.e., I have attention, who wants to pay me for it? But I would argue that, those 80 episodes I did with Bitcoin with Jake, that was the deep dive, the due diligence as an investor from a kind of macro standpoint, and also like far more micro. Um, why sell a house and buy Bitcoin? Well, go and listen to those 80 episodes. Tell me why it's a stupid idea. Let's have a discussion. But it's the proof of work. As you learn more about Bitcoin, you start to understand how important scarcity is and how important it is that it's hard to find something. And that's why we value those things. And hence Bitcoin as digital scarcity, a discovery in a sense, is so powerful. basically just that blend of meetups and podcasting, and is you're hustling for guests and putting out shitty episodes that no one listens to because you can see like, great, I've had like five
You heard my
clicks or
whinge.
no, but there's very few people paying any attention. But I mean, I highly recommend doing it based on what I've got out of it. That wasn't necessarily a dollar return, but more a investment in my social capital, so my network, and also my skills. I just learned so much as a result of doing it. And as an investor, you can invest in financial assets, but you can also invest in, your own skill set and also your friendship network. And that's what a podcast does in a way that it's very, very hard to quantify. And so, yes, here we are today. I don't know exactly what day this is going to go out next week, but the
It'll be
website
July.
bitcoinmentoraustralia.com will be live,
Mm.
and you will be able to head there and check out what the business is going to offer and book some sessions, and we can go into all those details later. But no, it's a real pleasure, Dale.
I mean, it comes down to proof of work. I think anyone who is inspired or motivated to work in Bitcoin, whatever that is, maybe it's not a podcast because maybe you're a guy who likes to work behind the scenes, but is there a way that you can contribute? Is there a way that you can put work out there? Because ultimately, it's quite remarkable. But you know, at least in the podcasting world, the first thing you want to do is like, okay, I need an editor. Who do I work with? Okay, well, I can stick something up on Bitcoiner jobs and there'll be a couple applicants and you've got all these talented people that reach out to you. And frankly, I would rather give a job to a Bitcoiner who's prepared to learn how to edit than just some random, because I know that there is that sort of due diligence and there's that deeper layer and there's that almost, I don't want to say integrity per se, but there's just something about like, I want to support people who are Bitcoiners first and foremost. And so
Mm,
I really do believe that like is a huge way that you can connect with like-minded people. So definitely go to meetups as and meet people. Because I feel like sometimes Twitter and those kind of places, you can get stuck in these sort of ideological kind of battles and you can get involved in shit posting, you can do all this sort of stuff. But the real constructive stuff, the real stuff that matters, where you can form meaningful connections, like real connections, not just sort of these sort of faux digital ones with NIMS, like with real people, is when you go to real events and you connect with people in the meat space, as they would say.
mm,
So,
mm.
yeah. So, I think one of the things I did want to talk to you a little bit about today was obviously in Byron, just a slight pivot here, Jake, but I suppose I tend to jump around in these conversations, so
That's
you'll
right.
you're indulged. We've been having some chats in the background just about kind of like your plans and what you think about going forward. One of the things that you're interested in doing is potentially putting your roots down and buying a home.
Mm,
And there's been this sort of toing and fro in your mind, as it were, as to whether or not you crystallize your gains and sell Bitcoin and put down a deposit in a house, or whether you try and find another solution. And I'd be curious to know whether or not you have made some progress in that regard following our last conversation.
Lots of progress, no decision.
Yeah.
And something that really crystallized for me recently, a good word, is as an investor, you get paid for your decision making. That's ultimately what it is. If you decide to put your money into something and it goes wrong, well, you made the wrong decision. It's like the ultimate capitalist move. And this is the whole drives me mad when I see this idea of like a bailout. It's like, no, no, a bailout is not reality. If you got it wrong, you got it wrong. Take the loss and move on. And and so this is an incredibly difficult process because the closer you get to Bitcoin, I've seen things repeat all over the place in terms of people's journeys. So the more you know, the more you buy. I found that to be a very replicable trend between lots of people who I've chatted to about their Bitcoin journey. Um,
As a
and
percentage
then
of your net worth, basically, Jake. I mean, basically, as a percentage of your liquid net worth, the
mm,
more you know, the more your conviction grows, and then the greater the percentage of your total assets, right?
correct. And
Yeah.
as someone brilliantly described today, where your mind goes, your money follows, which I
Yeah.
also completely agree with. Shout out to Mike Cook, who I did a initial episode for the Bitcoin Mentor podcast. So
Oh, awesome.
plug that for a second. That'll be out next week as well. To hear the founder of Bitcoin Mentor and where he all started from. It's an awesome story. But to his
Oh,
point, where your mind goes, your money follows. And so one of the really hard things about Bitcoin is actually very simple. Just got to hold it. Just got to sit on your fucking hands and hold it. And so, in a world in which we're conditioned in many ways to be super busy the whole time, you've got to be busy, busy, busy. If you're not busy, then you're a fucking loser. And the other part of that then being is that there are shiny objects that appear all the time. It's like you could maybe get better gains in Bitcoin doing this other thing.
Yeah.
And it's just very, very hard to know. Do you stick or do you twist? And it's a game of cards in a sense. But the game of cards, unless you're gambling very, very heavily, it's a game, right? This is different. This is reality. This is capital allocation. If you get it wrong, it's gone or it's severely eroded. So one of the hard things to answer, of course, when it comes to where you live is you cannot live in a Bitcoin. That's very, very clear.
The
And some of
title of
the
today's episode, by the way. No.
yeah, no, that could be. That could be.
Yeah.
The reality of moving around a wife, pregnant wife even, and 2 small kids, Airbnbs, dealing with long-term rental contract negotiations, trying to find a place that you actually want to live in. And it's been a lot. And one of the lessons from that is that is hard work in itself. The uncertainty is frustrating. It's really hard not to get into a kind of scarcity mindset. Oh my God, we will never find another house. And then you go and either overpay or you take a place that
Mhm.
you don't want or whatever. So there is a reality to not owning your own real estate that means in a sense you're in someone else's playing field. And I would like to solve that problem for my young family. And I think it would be very healthy for us to have a solid kind of base to work from and grow together. But the flip side of that is, well, you've got to then deal with the real estate market. And if you want to get into that, then you're going to have to sell some Bitcoin. It's like, well, from a financial capital perspective, is selling Bitcoin a good idea? No. And to buy real estate, I mean, I personally think of a holiday home is about the worst investment you can have because you don't get any utility value out of it apart from perhaps a few weeks a year. And the real cost of running a house as a small business is a lot higher than what people ever account for. And inflation, it's not as good a return as people think they get, in my opinion.
Mm.
I've also been a real estate owner in the past and just dealing with land, dealing with tenants, dealing with agents. The shower's broken. Oh, they want to leave. Oh, now it's empty for a few weeks. And you're like, oh, and the mortgage still gets paid. And this just, it's stressful. And so I don't really want to get back into that headspace. This is quite a rambling response. And there is no straight answer to this.
You're still undecided, man.
I'm completely undecided. And it's like, well, look,
Mm.
we've got another 10 and a half months of this rental contract to run. Like, what are you stressing about? But I think what's an important thing to share for those out there listening is I'm not normal from a perspective of a mortgage broker. And that's largely because I live on the capital gain that my investing generates. And so I don't have much of an income. And therefore, the guys that want to lend money to me, they look at my income that's been declared. They're just like, well, that's fucking waste of time because you can't take any leverage against that.
Mm.
And that means that actually operating in the fiat mortgage market for me is really difficult. And what I try to do is a number of things. First of all, you can use something called an alt doc. This is a type of debt instrument where you basically get an accountant to sign off on the fact that you could afford a certain amount of income, even though you don't currently show it because of your asset base. And I just don't think accountants of any real pedigree are that keen on signing them. So I contacted my esteemed accountant. They're like, well, I'll sign off on what your income was last year. Do you know what I mean? Quite
Yeah.
straightforward. The irony being, the second you get an approval for these loans, they couldn't give a shit who you are or what you're doing as long as you pay them. But
Oh,
you
they
know,
don't care if your circumstances change. I mean,
no,
like,
it's
and
mad.
you can
But
literally have
so
a house
I
for 2
struggle to
months and
I
then
struggle
quit.
to tick the boxes when it comes to
Mm.
being lent to as a mortgage. And I thought it might be possible to go and find a Airbnb and look at it as like an investment property and sell the future revenue of the property to a mortgage provider. And that also wasn't very interesting to them. They're not interested in future returns on a property. They want to look at your current income.
Yeah.
What was cool though, and this is really great sign of Bitcoin evolving and the marketplace kind of maturing, is in Australia, the guys at Monochrome Asset Management have had their ETF approved, and that is now trading on the CBOE. So that's
I
the
don't know how to
second.
pronounce it. It could be the SIBO, but I have no clue.
Okay, so that's
Yeah,
like
secondary exchange.
that's the secondary exchange here in Australia.
Mm.
Now, to talk through the mechanics of that, that's basically 1% per year for an ETF product. But what they do have is if you were to move 10 Bitcoin into their ETF, they have a trust product which you can use. So in theory, should you have that many Bitcoin, you could move your Bitcoin into their ETF product without paying a capital gain. So that's pretty cool in
Hmm.
that you're not going to have to crystallize a gain to then get your ETF. And then on the back end of that, they're working on a lender that is not yet, this is not by any means organized and done, but basically, and I don't want to share too much information because it's not my company, not my product, but there is a potential lender that will take your ETF units and lend you fiat against those ETF units.
Yeah.
And they'll do it at a very competitive interest rate. But instead of putting down 20% and getting 80% more money, like how a mortgage operates, it's like put down 10 Bitcoins and you get 5 Bitcoins worth of cash. So you're literally under leveraged by a degree of 10 to what you currently do in the mortgage market.
Mm.
If Bitcoin is the fastest horse in the race with the best property rights and you can go anywhere you want with it whenever you want, to take a significant portion of that capital and deploy it into a piece of real estate that you cannot move, that actually costs you money over time without any leverage, is just a massive, massive call. Because what
Mm.
if you want to move house? Or what if it's too small? Or what if it's next to a dickhead neighbor? Or what if like the government's suddenly like you can't do, X, Y, Z with your house when you wanted to? Any
Mm.
number of different things could crop up. I think it'd be really very, very cool when you start to see Bitcoin lending products like what you touched on earlier develop based on using an ETF like that. So it's like a securities lending model essentially. That's really cool because that is a regulated and, in my eyes, that's a legitimate route to taking debt against my Bitcoin. I would use that. Every other kind of debt product I've seen to date has been either extremely expensive or punted by someone I've never heard of before. I'm not going to be taking debt from those people. So that's kind of cool. But yes, I'm still stressing about where to have the family and what's the right option. And as of literally yesterday, it's like you need to stop fucking worrying about this. Like we'll deal with it next year or something. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
where I'm at.
Interesting. I mean, I've mentioned this on the show before, but I moved 7 times in 5 years. And so by the end of it, my wife was like absolutely fed up. And
Yes, fair
we did
enough.
we did end up breaking our lease at the end because it got to this point where every house we'd go and visit, I'd be like, oh God, hopefully now, she's not going to get too attached to it because every single house that we went to go see, it just built up the pressure more and more and more because there was just this huge sense that we kind of just wanted to put our roots down and settle.
Mm,
I was more kind of partial to the idea of just being able to kind of ride it out a bit. But I think within a partnership, you got to it comes down to negotiation and compromise, and you got to
mm,
figure out what works for you as a couple. And if one or both parties are kind of saying, "Hey, listen, I need something where I can literally just put my roots," you got one or two options. You can either sell your corn or
mm.
pay the CGT and put down the deposit, and hopefully you got a decent fiat
And
gig.
look, I'm not against selling Bitcoin.
Absolutely
Absolutely not.
not.
Like at
No,
the end of the day, what's money for? Money's for what you can buy with it. Like
absolutely,
it's not about sitting there and
absolutely,
counting your pennies all day long. It's like actually you want to experience life, enjoy it for what it is, and seize opportunities. So
totally.
I think it just is that gnawing thing. It's if you could sit tight for another 12 months, I still see the fundamentals of this bull market absolutely exploding.
Mm.
And what are we, 60K US today or something? That it's a great time to buy a little bit on the way up. The bull market's still cracking on. And it would just be really irritating to go and sell a bunch now when could you wait another 12 months? It might be 4x from right now.
I
And it's
think
like,
that's
yeah,
the
well,
point. For
and
us,
then it's
we
like
know
then I
that.
don't then I probably am in an area where it's I don't need a lender. This is probably a mistake that I'm willing to admit and I've learned since, which is that as an investor, I was looking at my entire net wealth as potentially investable capital. And I chose to, with my wife, sell our house in 2022
Mm.
to rent in a nicer neighborhood, a bigger property, and have more flexibility on where to go. And the flip side of that decision was that you can't control the space that you're in because you're in someone's tenanted property. And that's something that you learn as a result making your decisions. And that's okay. But I think in future, in an ideal world, how I would set myself up is that the family home, whatever that was, would not be included in my investable assets. You would just buy it and own it, and it would have a utility value and an emotional value. and you have to just be okay with that. And that would be a big lesson. Like I would, yeah,
Yes,
I would not advise people to do what we chose to do. That's not to say it
totally.
hasn't made me good money. Just there's a whole load of other factors that I didn't consider when I decided to do it.
No, that's fair enough, man. I said it in a recent episode that I released around real estate. Your primary residence shouldn't be considered an investment in a way. It's a lifestyle asset, and much like a
Yeah,
holiday,
good description.
if you can just separate it from that and say, look, I don't want to get absolutely like annihilated, but if I can just get out of this, and yes, we know inflation's bullshit and it's not the real rate of inflation, but it keeps up with the so-called CPI inflation, then I'll be okay as long as it's a lifestyle asset. But I need to have emotionally, psychologically have portioned that off as being completely separate from my
Mm,
investable assets, where I'm literally saying I want to back the fastest, best horse in the race. And that's
mhm.
always going to be Bitcoin. And there is that opportunity cost.
Well,
I've
could I jump in there, Dale? So
Yeah.
one thing that did really excite me from this just recent investigation looking at debt and how you might get into the real estate space is should your Bitcoin stack be valuable enough? And if you could siphon off 20% of it and 50% of the value of that 20% was enough to buy yourself a family home, you could basically have a no money down property.
Mm,
Right? So you could still own your Bitcoin. You could pay them the, whatever the interest rate was per year. There was also an origination fee, and I think it was for a term of 2 to 5 years or something. So you'd have to refinance every couple of years, but that's okay. If your Bitcoin's doubled, then who
yeah.
cares, right? That's very, very compelling because, like, all of us that have just caught the Bitcoin bug, you catch it and you're like, "Oh my god, this is a big deal," and then nothing happens. So how does no one else believe this? What's going?
Mm.
It's like it's a slow burn. This thing's going to take 10 years. In 10 years' time, we're going to turn around and be like, "Oh, it really did take 10 years, didn't it?" Like we've been talking about Bitcoin-backed loans for a fucking decade,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and you know what I mean. And it
No,
really will
totally.
take that long. So I can absolutely see a future in which your primary store of value, your primary piece of collateral is Bitcoin. You store it in your own wallet and you know how many are there because it's verifiable, all that stuff. And with that, you'll be able to take out, loans in whatever your local currency is to buy other things. And whether that is a house or whether that is an equity in a local business, whether that is just to go on holiday, who knows? It's up to you.
Mm,
But that would be a very cool place to be in that you'd own the equity in your real estate as well as owning the equity in the underlying collateral, which is the Bitcoin. And you
mm,
would just have to service that debt. And if you, then had other ways of creating income, whether that be dividends from a different set of investments, or you had a business of your own with good cash flow or a job or whatever the case might be, if you can service that debt, then happy days. You're off to the races, essentially.
totally. Totally. We're at this weird precipice where it's really still a little bit too soon for some of these products. And I think the people that are going to be able to take advantage are going to be, I don't want to say whales because that's probably a bit misleading, but they're going to be people who've got some deep pockets. Whereas fast forward 20 years from now, perhaps if you've got one Bitcoin, that might be sufficient for you to be able to then go and borrow enough
Mm,
to put down a significant percentage down on a home, as an
mm,
example. So I sense that that particular product might be some time away. And it kind of leads into this other thing that I've been thinking about lately, which is, kind of, and I put this out there last night, and it's like the gains in Bitcoin are typically confined to 10 days in a year, and that's like 2.7% of the time. That's
say
where
that again. Sorry.
so the gains in Bitcoin on an
Mm,
annual basis
mm.
are typically confined to 10 days, 10 trading days.
Okay.
And that's 2.7% of the time.
Holy
For the
shit.
other for the other 98.3% of the time, you literally are doing nothing. Okay.
Wow.
And that's the hard
That
thing
really
about
hammers
Bitcoin.
home that whole concept of it's all about time in the market rather than timing the market.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I find that really, that's something that Bitcoin teaches you, because something you're referring to there was, and if you're a Bitcoiner and if you spend any amount of time in this space, especially in the last 4 years, you know that the halvings matter and that they typically precede significant price action, whatever that looks like. And maybe it is the case that we've got diminishing returns. Maybe that model is totally broken. I don't know. But I'd be shocked if this particular cycle doesn't do at least a 2 or 3x from the halving price, right?
Mm.
So for you to now want to sell Bitcoin at this very point would be shit. I wouldn't say, I'd say don't do it. I would say
Well, it
hang on.
does depend. It depends what your buy price is, though.
Yeah, but I would say, look, if you wait till the end of 2025, I think that you'd be sitting there. I know what you mean. Like if you bought Bitcoin at like 15 grand,
Mm.
you can crystallize a really good gain. But I would
Where else have you made 2.5x when you own your own coins in self custody? I mean,
no. However, what I would say though is the chances are by the end of next year,
it could be
so
a lot more. That's
give it
true.
18 months, I would say we're 2x from here, maybe 3x, 4x, and you'd be thinking that thing is significantly cheaper, that thing that I want. So
Mm.
that's how I would be thinking through this particular issue at this particular point in time. Maybe at a different time, we're in a different point in the cycle where you're kind of going a bit sideways and flat. Perhaps that's when you want to think about these things. But right now, I think there's too many gains in front of us for the next 18 months
Mm.
that it would scare me to crystallize any gains. Unless we're
Well,
really
if I was
compelling.
honest, Dale, just to riff off that, so the strategy back in 2022, even the back end of 2021, as I really dove down the rabbit hole, and I just knew in my heart of hearts, if I don't buy as much of this stuff as I can, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. And some part of that was hyper rational investor due diligence, just looking at all the shit that was going on. It was like, this makes sense, this makes sense,
Mm,
this makes sense. And the other half of that was the intuition. Just the intuition just like screaming at me. This is a big deal. Do something about it. Do something about it. And I had all sorts of difficult decisions to make, including one which is again real estate. Funny enough, I had an apartment in London that was a absolutely horrific investment. In fact, I made a leveraged real estate play in central London on 2 apartments and took out mortgages. 8 years I held those investments for, and I exited for, if I was lucky, 50% of the equity position. Absolute shit show. And I beat myself up about it every single fucking day. And one of the things I had to learn, and that was the biggest loss I've ever had as an investor, and it's your biggest lesson essentially. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so bullish about Bitcoin as a store of values, because I understand how hard it is if you get real estate wrong. It's
mm,
just, oh my God, it's horrible. But so 2022, the mindset was very straightforward. Reallocate capital from everywhere else that you don't actually need it and buy Bitcoin. Obviously, you need cash as a cash flow. So we kept cash, but that pays your rent, that buys you food, that does whatever you need to do. So it was mainly real estate that I was selling. I sold the whole lot. So my primary residence in Melbourne and 2 apartments in London, and I was buying Bitcoin. I mean, a beautiful time in hindsight. Literally, like not quite 15K US, but like right down there. So if you've got average buy prices of 20 grand, when you're sitting on 60, that's a pretty good investment. And so, who's selling today? You see all these moon boys online talking about people who've made money, guys, because they were smart and they were buying it when everyone else, when old Sam Bankman fucking fraud was like, oops, I was selling Bitcoin I didn't have and is now in jail, right? And it
yeah.
wicked down to like 15, 16,000 US. Well, thanks very much, guys.
When everyone was out
People
of fiat, bro,
people were
that's when,
buying, and that
yeah.
phrase, when there's blood on the streets, make an investment. It's true. And it will happen again. I would be highly unsurprised that if in 2026, maybe the end of 2026, we see an absolutely horrific bear market and a
Mhm.
whole load of stuff gets washed out because everyone's overexcited, and it will happen again. But my strategy was quite straightforward. It's like sell everything, buy Bitcoin, one, and two, hold it until the top of the next cycle. Which, shout out to my mate Jigs, great friend of
Mm.
mine who's an excellent at home technical analyst who's taught himself off nothing how to read the rhythms from the charts, but been very impressed with his work. And he was looking at 2025, kind of July, August, September timeline as being the next blow off top. So my plan was always to buy the Bitcoin through 2022, 2023, and sit and hold it until that time, roughly in 2025. And this whole looking for a house and mortgage and all this stuff, this is me getting distracted from the real job, which is just sit and hold.
Mm.
Just sit and hold. And yes, there are difficulties with renting properties. And yes, there's been all these things you learn about, but it's distraction. And we like to be distracted. But when push comes to shove, I'm not selling.
You know what's so interesting? So you when you were talking, something just clicked in my brain, which was everyone who I've spoken to who's had some experience in financial markets and a little bit of like investing experience has something that has defined their mindset.
Mm,
So I've got a mate whose friends went through the GFC in Dublin, where property got absolutely annihilated.
mhm,
And so he is hyper conservative. And so
mhm,
he has the mindset of someone who could be a Bitcoiner. He thinks things through, he goes to first principles. But it took a conversation the other day for me to like, now I get you. I've had this conversation with my dad too. In 1987 was that Black Monday. He was involved in a company that literally had just gone public in South Africa. And days afterwards, there was
wow.
Black Monday. And it was just a fucking washout. And that has defined the
Ouch.
way he thinks. You've
Soz
made
dad.
yes, sauce, Dad. Lol. No, poor bugger. But and then there was, in your case, you've made some horrific
Oh,
investments in
mate.
London real estate, which
Yeah.
if you had to ask someone, is London real estate a good investment? It's a no-brainer, right? It's a home run. And so those are your kind of experience, and they kind of define the way you think and your strategies and your approach. In
Mm,
my case, I've been blessed to have I've learned as much as I can from people around me and try to learn from their mistakes. But I got carried away in the bull run in 21 and took leverage on my Bitcoin, and I
mhm,
have less Bitcoin as a result. And
mm.
I had some moments where I would just
Sosdale.
so I was saying, "Oh,
If your
lol."
dad ever listens to this, now he can laugh at
You
you,
fucking imbecile. Yeah. So
yeah.
I was the BlockFi boy and
Really?
a Nexo boy. And yeah, it's Nexo. Hey, yeah. And because I used to listen to NLW of the breakdown, because I was still trying to
Don't know who that
figure out
is.
where the signal was. And I was like, well, if they're sponsoring that show, it's got to be credible, right? And then, McCormick with BlockFi.
Mm,
Didn't understand where the yield was coming from per se. It was a little bit stupid and naive. Should have really asked the question. But yeah, really got over my skis a bit. And it was shit, man. I felt horrific, especially when we went down like I can't recall now. Was it like mid June of 20, mid June 22, I'd say, mid 22.
mm,
And what a lesson. So eventually I had a whole bunch of other equity investments, cleared those all out, and then I had to sell Bitcoin, and I was like, "I'm
mm.
fucking done.
Ouch.
No more leverage ever, ever again. The only leverage I will take is on my real estate."
Mm,
And I had this opinion that I was always gonna say, "I want literally my primary residence to be paid off, and
mm.
then, I'm in the clear. I'm safe." I don't care about that anymore. I actually don't give a shit about paying this off ever. Like, I wanna pay these
Yeah, well,
guys
that's one of
as
the
little as
reasons I think
possible.
real estate's compelling, is you
Yeah,
can easily take leverage. In
exactly.
theory, I mean,
The key, though, the
not that
key
I
is
can,
cash flow.
fuckers.
Cash flow is king. If you don't have
Yes.
cash flow, you're dead, right? So as long as you have confidence in your household income, I think it makes no sense to ever pay back even a dollar more to the banks who've
Mm,
created this out of thin air anyway. So who
mhm.
cares? There are so many other investments I'd rather be drawn to, obviously Bitcoin. But yeah, so it's just funny how like I'm just kind of triangulating or
Well, so
triangulating.
if I can let me chime off that for a second. I think what it really did is it taught me how difficult it is to manage property. Like it's a small business, if not like a full time thing. When you come across Bitcoin from a store of value perspective, it's just so clean. It's just dreamy in comparison. It's literally this digital thing in a wallet. I mentioned I had an 8-year hold, so I bought those properties in 2014 and I sold them in 2022. And I'd owned Bitcoin since 2015. And I sold a bunch of that in 2016 and 2017, and I held about 25% of my original stack from 2015 I still own today. And you don't fucking have to do anything. Just sits in a wallet. And you don't get one email, you don't get one phone call, you don't have one like, month where the mortgage goes out and the income doesn't come in. None of it. And it's just like, oh my God, that is a way better system.
Mm.
It's just blatantly obvious. And then to add to that picture is my father died when I was 20. Miss your dad all the time, of course. And he was a wealthy guy, and we sold the family home, and I inherited money. So I was 22 years old when I first got some capital. It's like, what do I do with this thing? And then 25, I got some more. My initial plan was I went into London, found a wealth management business, and their main advertising that resonated with me is we won't lose your money. I was like, well, that's great. Let's go super conservative. These guys are all in suits in a nice office. This seems like the right option.
Must
And
be
when I was
easy.
25, when I got the slug of capital, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to do 50% into real estate, 50% into the wealth management business I was already using. And as you've heard, the experience I had with my real estate investing, that did not go well. That's not to say that I didn't get to live in the property for a bit. That's not to say that I didn't learn a huge amount from it. But then there's the world of wealth managers, financial advisors, whatever you might call them in the part of the world that you live. They are discretionary investors on your behalf that you pay 1% to, and they can put your money wherever they deem fit. Now, surprise, surprise, they've got a bunch of buddies that run a bunch of funds. They take 1%, the fund takes 0.5%, and you then get this portfolio at the end of the year where, they might invite you into their swanky office and give you a lunch, or you do it over a video call. It's like a presentation as to how marvelously they did with your money that year. And there is still like something like $200 trillion allocated to bonds in a world in which real inflation rates are like 10%.
Mm.
Like, what the fuck?
Mm.
That doesn't make any sense. You're guaranteeing to lose purchasing power every year by holding a bond. Like, is that a good idea? And so I guess the other side of that picture is the real estate market was not an enjoyable experience for me. But it's also like, what's this portfolio of stuff that you tell me that I own, and why is it good? And they make it sound really complicated, when actually often you're just talking to the relationship manager who passes all the money over to someone who then just chucks in a bunch of funds. And it's a kind of marketing game. It's not even really an investment game that they play.
Mm.
And that was really frustrating when I started to come up against that process. Where it's like, well, hang on, what do I own? And I literally had a financial advisor say to me, "You can't beat inflation." Well, you're sacked. That should be the response. Like, that is absolutely useless wealth management advice. And so yes, my second G&T is kicking in. I get a bit fired up about this stuff, but it shouldn't
You don't
be.
like them, Jake. I mean, you
No,
don't
it's not that I
like
don't
your.
like them. I respect them, and they do what they can, but they're working within a system that doesn't benefit their customer. It's a good business for them, and it's a good business for the people that they
Mm.
buy from, but it's not actually necessarily a good thing for people who are trying to manage wealth on behalf of their family. And that really
Mm.
frustrates me. So one, I see bonds, complete waste of time. I see financial advisors getting really upended by Bitcoin in some ways, and real estate, like those, I mean, particularly bonds and real estate. People keep money in these things, and they shouldn't be. And I see that being a huge source of potential growth for Bitcoin from a price action
Mm.
perspective in the future. Like, all this
Mm.
capital that's tied up in those asset classes, thinking that's the best place to store value when it's not. And so it's really, I guess, a touch point of experiences, isn't it? All these things blend in to help develop a view that you have. Um, and just Bitcoin just does a better job at store of value over time than any of those other things. And if you hadn't invested in those other things and experienced them, then you wouldn't see it for what it is.
Yeah. But
I'll stop ranting.
I think no. That's cool, man. I think the starting position is really the fact that most people don't have enough time in the day to focus on what happens with their money. They earn their money, and they literally are just trying to keep their head above water in terms of just spending some time with the kids, getting them bathed and clothes, and then sitting down watching Survivor, hitting the hay.
Mm.
catching the train, getting into the city, and doing it all over again,
Exhausting.
5 days a week, watching the footy on the weekend, having a barbecue. Did you catch the game? Yeah, that was rough. And then
Mm.
doing it all over again. And they live in a world where they can trust these people, and they believe that they can trust them. What we've done as Bitcoin is just kind of pierce the veil, so to speak, and kind of go, okay, well, what is it that you guys are actually doing? And when I was a terrible employee in 2015, I just spent some time like during work hours becoming financially literate, just really trying to understand all the different asset classes. And the first thing I figured out was crazy was the fact that, hold on, you get paid percentage-based fee irrespective of performance. That seems
Mm.
fucking silly. Like, surely I should pay
Well,
you.
in theory, someone could take their funds somewhere else, but they never do.
Yeah,
It's
it's just
unbelievably
because it's
sticky
sticky.
business
It's
model.
sticky
Yeah.
and it's a ball ache. It's like banking, you know. So you're like, okay, well, that doesn't sound good. So literally, I could have a situation where I could literally lose money, but you're still clipping the ticket. So that's weird. I didn't like that. And then you start learning about bonds, and you go, okay, so these are, so basically, I'm funding government spending, or most of the time deficit spending. Okay, and then you go, well, let's talk about inflation. Is inflation real? I can't think of anything that's less than 10% up relative to last year. And I'm in the process of preparing an episode around inflation, just having a look at like how does it actually work here in Australia? What is actually comprised of inflation? How do they arrive at it? And the first thing I actually noticed was it doesn't include restaurants. Aussies love to fucking eat out. Like, how are you not including that? Like,
Mm.
what do you think?
Doesn't
People are
include
just sitting at
energy.
home eating
Like
Aldi's every night?
the most basic ingredient of an economy,
Yeah.
energy,
So
not in the fucking CPI.
no. So it's like going like, come on, guys. So we've done that sort of work. We go like, I don't buy the framework, I don't buy the metrics by which the whole entire financial system is based, CPI. I don't buy the idea that you're the experts because I didn't buy the fact that the government was in the best position to know what's best for my health during COVID.
Mm.
I don't trust what they suggest we eat in terms of food and medicine. And I don't think their schooling is particularly good. And we've done all this kind of work. So we kind of question things. Maybe we're just people who question stuff and we think differently. And that's what makes us Bitcoiners as opposed to investors who have dabbled in Bitcoin because we're actually in the culture because we question everything from the ground up. I know that you eat super clean and healthy for the most part, other than that filthy G&T you've got in your
Mm.
hand.
It's
But
delicious.
but you know what I'm saying? For the most part, like we are people who think and question stuff. And we talk about these NPCs and talk about them as being absolute imbeciles, but I actually have huge empathy for them because life is so busy, man, and they don't realize how much they're getting screwed. And one of the things I want to do with our business, I'm going to kind of introduce that back into the picture, is
Yeah, we better talk
like
about it. Yeah.
people don't understand what they're fucking investing in when it comes to their super. I have spoken to my colleagues at the place I work. I won't mention the name quite yet. And no one even knows who the super company is. No one even knows what they invest in. They don't even
Yeah.
know what the returns are.
Yeah.
It's almost as if it doesn't exist. It's like that is money that's put away. And someone said it's guaranteed to me the other day. And I was like, guaranteed in what sense? So to me,
Yeah.
I am so motivated to help financially empower people and go, you don't understand, you're getting fucked here. There's a hack. Fast forward 20 years. If you have a single Bitcoin in your super in like 30 years time, you're fucking golden as far as I'm concerned. You can
Mm.
buy whatever you
But
want.
almost that's too long a time horizon, no doubt. I mean, I think even
That's for
just a
super though.
4-year cycle is enough to materially change someone's life.
I suppose it depends on the allocation though, man. Like, I mean,
Well,
if you've
just in
only
terms
got
of
put 50 grand in, maybe it
no, I
doubles
don't
in
mean
4
just
years.
financially. I mean
The mindset.
holistically. Yes. So
Mm,
to riff on some of the things you said, first of all, I don't consider myself as someone who is consciously anti-mainstream. Does that make sense? I don't try to make things difficult, or I don't try to be difficult on purpose. And I think it's fair to say that in a way, Bitcoin has radicalized me in a sense. And that's kind of because of the fact that it's like a truth serum. And
mhm,
you start reading about Austrian economics. I mean, this is just a whole world of different thinking that's hidden from the mainstream that actually makes sense. Like I studied business management to university degree level, and economics didn't really make sense. And then you start studying a bit of, a little bit on Mises, and you're like, well, hang on a second, this guy's he knows what he's talking about. This actually makes sense. And the concept of sound money and the fact that money is something that is chosen by the free market. It's not something that's chosen by a government. It exists because of multi centuries of trial and error to find the tool that is, the best reincarnation of the characteristics of money. It's the most fascinating intellectual rabbit hole I've ever gone down. But you go
Mm.
down it, and the problem then becomes, well, hang on, that doesn't fucking make sense. Oh, that doesn't make sense. What, the food pyramid? Hang on, who made that? And then you start looking at how central banks have been able to finance government, and so you've got political scientists and monetary scientists in cahoots for. I mean, the Fed was, started over 100 years ago. It's
Mm.
the engine room of supposedly the leader of the free world. What the fuck does that even mean? What is the free world? Oh, sorry, you go. Yeah. Anyway, before I go down that rabbit hole, I could, start ranting too
Julian
much. But
Assange was free today, by the
he
way.
was, yeah. Shout out to that. Shout out to that
Yeah.
guy. Talk about proof of work. Fucking
My
hell, fair
God.
play. Well, let's
Jeez.
see what happens when his plane lands in Australia and whether or not they pick him up first. I mean, who knows?
Hopefully it's all good, man.
Um, I guess the point is that when you start to realize that you can own your money is something that can be yours. You can be your own bank and you can store it safely. And you know that it's only ever going to be one portion of a 21 million coin network. And this is like a foundation for life. It's like an island in an ocean. It's it's something you can grab hold of and attach yourself to in all the noise. And you're like, okay, I can hold on to this. And that is a a framework to then start analyzing everything else around you. Well, hang on. So the government says it's about food. The government says it's about money. The government says it's about health. The government says it's about, education. Well, who funds the government? Okay, so it's a small handful of people that control the central bank. Well, who's the central bank? Oh, fun enough, it's a private institution, and you can't even find out who owns it. Who decides how much they print? Don't know. And it gets murky so quickly, and then you just can't help but ask questions. And then in some ways, you do become that kind of cantankerous bloke on the sideline who's like, none of this makes any sense, guys. I don't care
Yeah.
about the football result, even
Yeah.
though I will be waking up in the morning to watch the England game in the Euros. So just yeah. Anyway, you
But
can't.
yeah, yin and yang. But it
Old
makes
habits die hard.
but I suppose what you're saying is like, yeah, it's true. It's like it's not like you're just a born and bred conspiracy theorist sort of
No, I didn't get
person.
here on purpose. It's just been a whole evolutionary process, I think is what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, and it is about truth seeking. That's what you said that resonates most. It's ultimately about truth. And like fiat is false.
Mm.
You are
Yeah,
pretending that things have value
that's
and it's not
completely
real.
right.
Yeah.
It's it's I described this before on a great podcast. I encourage you guys to, if you haven't listened to the Decentralized Consciousness podcast. So my meditation teacher Salmon kicked it off, and Caleb now runs it. It's a brilliant podcast. But I described it as getting something for nothing.
Oh
That
yeah.
is fiat. It
Yeah.
is it is the ability to get something for nothing, and it is an instinct of humans that's never going to go away. But it was
Mm.
something that was reincarnated in money in the last 100 years that it's honestly, it's such a big deal.
I'll give
We'll
you
have
an
our
example.
grandkids will be like, what the hell happened there, guys?
I'll give you an example with health. Ozempic. Think about all these fucking celebrities who are taking this weight loss drug and they're getting a Ozempic face. Have you seen that? Their whole
No.
face change. Their whole facial structure changes.
What?
These lazy fucks can't just stop eating as much, start exercising more, and actually, that's how it
What, their
works, right?
faces have changed? You're
So their
kidding me.
whole facial structure changes because of this miracle drug called Ozempic.
Oh
And it
my
is
God.
scary. You should see what this old
Again,
Jessica
you're
Simpson is.
selling a product that
It's
gets you
shortcuts.
something for nothing.
It's something for nothing. It's exactly.
Just
It's like I
not
don't want to do the
reality.
work. I don't want to do the work. I would
It's like
rather just get to
we
the
bring it
end.
back to economics. It's like, okay, in an environment in which products and services, they cannot be recreated overnight. Productivity remains constant, yet prices go up. The only reason that can be happening is because the monetary unit that is in the economy is inflating.
Mm,
And it doesn't, so what? Printing more money is not going to create more products and services. It just creates more money and pushes prices up. Doesn't make sense. And that's just, yeah, it's a funny one. One thing I'd love to chime on, Dale, what is and why I'm also very excited about Bitcoin Mentor, the idea of like really meeting someone where they're at on their Bitcoin journey, being able to cater to whatever their requirement is. We have a very, very flexible product in that sense. But it boils down to the simple statement. And again, shout out to Jigs who really epitomizes this, which is give a man a fish, feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, and you feed him for life. And so what I see Bitcoin Mentor as is a way to teach people how to become totally self-sovereign in their financial stack. And that's an incredibly cool thing to work on. And
mm.
I'm very excited to do so.
Totally, man. 100%. And that's something that I've been really keen to do from a kind of entrepreneurial perspective, particularly within the Bitcoin space. Something that resonates with me just from an ethical perspective, from an ethos perspective. I think it resonates really deeply with me. Like, we'll meet you wherever you are. And I want to see more people take control of their financial destiny. And I'd love to help them along the way. So, yeah, watch the space, friends. And if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to either one of us. And the other thing we should also probably mention, and we didn't necessarily discuss this beforehand, but was that we're actually really keen to grow our network of local mentors. So Bitcoin Mentor launched originally in North America with, I believe, 17 mentors. And so if you're somebody here who's got Bitcoin chops and you're keen to help people on their journey, feel free to reach out to myself or Jake. And yeah, we'd love to have a chat. But man, it's been really good, eh? Let's raise a glass one more time. And I'm really pumped to go on this journey with you. And thank you to all my listeners so much for coming along the journey with me too. And yeah, it's been a
Cheers,
real
everyone.
pleasure. Hey, cheers to that, man.
Yeah, and well done with all the progress with the Why Bitcoin show, Dale. I'm sure you have some recurring listeners that enjoy joining you on the journey. I, for one, have I've probably got at least 5 or 6 episodes of your recent ones that I pumped through, listening to what you're researching and who you're talking to, and it's very valuable. It's hard sometimes when you create this stuff because you can't necessarily get immediate kind of reverb. You don't get the feedback straight away, but it's very important work, and so thank you. And yeah,
Awesome.
very excited about Bitcoin Mentor Australia. So check it out, bitcoinmentoraustralia.com. And we might as well also talk about the fact that we're going to be launching a podcast.
Yeah, there'll be a new one. There'll be a new podcast in town. It'll be the second hottest pod in Australia after mine. Uh, Bitcoin Unfiltered. You can expect the first episode, the inaugural, the debut episode coming out next week. So
Yeah,
look forward
second
to
week of
that.
July, we're going to launch that.
Shooting the breeze, talking Bitcoin and all things.
Yeah,
Guess
well, the
what's happening?
format of the show, so it's well, is it fair to say that it has not been that easy finding guests in the current environment? And so
Correct.
one of the learnings from that being, if we're going to work together, we also should have a podcast. And with that, wouldn't it be fun if it was just the two of us the whole time and see where that takes us? And so each week it'll be about an hour. Every week we'll release an episode, and we're allowed to bring 3 questions each, which we can kind of, or 3 topics, right? And we're going to be able to hopefully cycle through all of them, but I'm sure we'll get waylaid on a number of touchy
Totally.
subjects on the way there.
And I think what's cool is we'll have 6 in total and maybe we'll only get through 3. But I think what's quite cool is I found that also just engaging with folks who listen to the podcast saying like, hey guys, what do you think? What should we talk about this week and whatnot? I actually found that quite cool. And people really love it.
What
And I
people were
really
reaching
appreciate
out
it
to you
too.
suggesting topics or
Yeah, exactly. So I'll
okay.
just say something along the lines of like I had Jeff Booth on and I did a bunch of questions with Jeff and people really loved it and
Mm,
appreciated it. It makes my job easier, quite frankly, as well, because it's like sometimes people are keyed into all these different types of niche topics and fascinating sort of like things within Bitcoin, and we all come from Bitcoin from like a different perspective. So I was like, I think it's always cool to get people's opinion, and I certainly will be reaching out to people and saying, hey man, what do you think? But
mm.
overall, super pumped, very optimistic. The future's bright, and very grateful. to be working, yeah, with you, Mike, Ben, and yeah, let's
Yeah, well,
fucking
shout out to the guys in Canada for starting the whole thing and for getting us involved. And Dale,
yeah,
thank you so much for having
absolutely.
me on the Why Bitcoin show today.
Awesome, man. Awesome. All right, we'll chat again soon, brother. Take it easy, man.